Once again, welcome to this session, Hidden Carers, Hidden Benefits, supporting older people to access benefits. My name is Gareth. I am one of the trainers here at Society Matters. There is a lovely photo of me in all of my cheeseball glory, and if you've done any of our training before, then you'll know I'm not a big fan of that photo. So everybody say hello and everybody say goodbye, because we're not going to look at it again. So before we get into it properly, if I may be self-indulgent for just a second and give you a little bit of background about myself and about us at Society Matters, kind of who we are and what we do, just in case this is your first time joining us. So Society Matters is the trading subsidiary of Citizens Advice Gateshead. We are actually one of the largest citizens advice in the country. I think we're just pipped the post by Manchester, I do believe. But I work for a trading subsidiary. So what we do is we deliver a range of courses on various different, what you might call social welfare issues. So we run courses on things like benefits for older people, for example, that I'm going to talk about soon, universal credit, immigration, housing, homelessness, debt, financial well-being. It's citizens advice. So if you can think of it, we probably cover it. But we try and feed the knowledge and the experience that we have as advisors into courses like this. What's unique about us, though, is that ultimately all of the profits that we make, they get gift-aided back to the charity to kind of fund the various projects that it has and enable our advisor to do the wonderful work that they do. And on the screen there is just some of the organisations that we are very proud to support and to work alongside. So just a quick bit of housekeeping, if I may. It looks like you've done this already. Thank you very much. If I can ask you to keep your microphones on mute, just to avoid any kind of background noise, that is very much appreciated. In terms of breaks, we're not going to be taking a break because we're only going to be here for, well, till about 3 o'clock, maybe slightly before. We do have some time sort of budgeted towards the end for a bit of a Q&A. If there's any particular questions that you want to ask, there will be time at the end. So we're aiming for a 3 o'clock finish. Might be a wee bit sooner than that, again, depending on any questions that you have, any questions that you might have, rather. So if you have questions at any point, please feel free to take yourselves off mute, pop a message in the chat, or just hang fire until the end. There will be time for a Q&A. And I will stop the recording before we get to the Q&A at the end as well. And I will tell you when I'm going to stop the recording also. Okay, doke. So what we are going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes or so. So it's all things to do with sort of caring and benefits associated with that. So we're going to spend a bit of time thinking about the link between aging, caring responsibilities, and what financial support is available. We're going to spend some time looking at individual benefits and why key benefits like pension credit or attendance allowance are very often underclaimed. We're going to talk about some of the barriers that older people might face when it comes to accessing benefits, things like stigma, accessibility, but not just older people themselves, but maybe the person caring for that older person. We're going to talk about how caring responsibilities in later life can impact on benefit entitlement, usually positively. And we're going to cap things off thinking about what kind of tips we might have for supporting older people and their carers to access financial support. Now, if I may, before we get into it, if you're not already aware, this week is actually National Carers Week. And so in recognition of that, we do have a bit of an offer that we are running at the moment. So you'll see a code on the screen there. And if at the end of this session you think, you know what, I'd like to find out more, there is that code on the screen that you can use for 20% off. That's either our Caring and Carers Matters course or our Benefits for Older People course. You just need to use that code before it's valid until midnight on the 24th. So about a week's time, thereabouts. If you're interested, you want to find out more, you can get you 20% off on either of those courses. But I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So, if I may, I've whittled on enough for the time being. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of it, right? Just to kind of set the scene a little bit, just to kind of give us some context. So, according to the Office for National Statistics, average life expectancy in the UK, for the UK as a whole, stands at about 83 years for women, 79 years for men. However, healthy life expectancy, so that is the period of time where we can expect to enjoy good health, is about 61. Life expectancy has now been on an upward trajectory for several years because of advancements in medicine and so on, apart from a minor sort of blip, if you like, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Broadly speaking, we are living longer, but that's not to say that we're spending it in good health as such. And that's where people might rely on that care or that welfare system. Now, alongside that, again, just to give us some perspective, according to Carers UK, there are around 2.4 million what we call sandwich carers. Anyone heard that term, sandwich carer? I want to have a punt what it might
Yeah,
mean.
I
Yeah.
have. Is it
Okay.
so like I'm the sandwich generation because I'm caring for my parents, but I'm also caring for a child?
Yeah, exactly. You are
Yeah.
someone who is sandwiched, as you say, between those two generations. So you're dealing with maybe an older relative and maybe dependent children that you're looking at as well, looking after as well, rather. Thank you for that. And yeah, according to Carers UK, there are around about 2.4 million sandwich carers. Now, collectively, carers save the UK economy around about £184 billion a year. That is only a little bit less than the entire budget of the NHS. For context, a bit later on, we're going to talk about some of the benefits associated with carers, things like carers allowance. It's not a huge amount of money when you think about all of the money that they're saving. It's a difficult square to circle. 800,000 pension households in Great Britain are entitled to, but not receiving a benefit called pension credit, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. That means that there are about a third of people who are eligible for it, but for whatever reason, they're not getting it. Now, pension credit in particular can be a real lifeline for people in older age, particularly if they're on lower incomes. That's what it's for. But the great thing is that it's not just about the money itself. It can act as a passport to all kinds of additional support. There was research done recently that says on average, a pension credit claim is actually worth around about £4,300 once you take into account all of the extra support that it can unlock. And yes, that does include some support for carers as well that we're going to talk about later. Over half of pensioner households who should be receiving pension credit but are not are single women. Is anyone surprised by any of those statistics? Or not surprised? That's fine too. Excuse me. Personally, the one that gets me is probably that last bullet point there. Over half of pensioner households who should be receiving pension credit but are not are specifically single women. So they are doubly disadvantaged in that sense. So, if I may, I'm going to open Pandora's box a little bit, and I'm going to ask you what benefits are available to support all the people and their carers. What comes to mind? Anything at all? Tenants allowance. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else? So we've got attendance allowance. Thank you. A few people popping stuff in the chat there. Oh, Daniela, you've done your homework. I like it. You see for mixed age couples. So, yeah, generally speaking, if you're overstayed pension age, you can't get universal credit unless you are part of a mixed age couple. Then potentially you can. Thank you, Gavin. Council tax reduction, housing benefit, pension credit, attendance allowance, carers allowance, housing benefit. Thank you. Be one or two people typing there, so I'll give it a second. If it's easier, folks, feel free to just take yourselves off mute. Excuse me. So you could look at carers allowance, housing benefit. You could look at carers credits potentially. More broadly outside of the welfare system as such, in terms of benefits, you could look at care needs assessments or carers assessments. Hmm, I'll leave it there. Now, historically, there's a bit of a stereotype, and I say stereotype, but it is borne out in research that all the people and their carers are generally more reticent to claim benefits. Oh, no problem, Hayden. As long as you're here, that's all that matters. Thank you very much for joining. There's this stereotype, if you like, that all the people in carers are more reticent to claim benefits. Why do you think that might be the case? What do you reckon? Pride? Thank you, Rebecca. I think there's something in that. Privacy as well. Thank you, Tracy. Yeah. I think certainly from my experience as an advisor, I think pride comes into it quite a bit. That feeling of I don't need benefits. I don't need that help. I'm all right. I'm fine. Are you though? Online forms, yes. Unfortunately, for better or worse, we do live in something of a digital age this day, don't we? And that's great if you know how to use it. But where does that leave people who are left behind, for want of a better phrase? It's all well and good saying, oh, you can just download the form here, or I can go to this website and I can do it here. Well, great. But if I'm, 83 and partially sighted or whatever it might be, th- 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 what happens then? Where do I go? Who's going to help me? They might not be aware how to apply. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Daniela. They might not be aware. It's all well and good that the help's out there, but if I don't know it's there, well, then what use is that to me? Hmm. Digital exclusion again, we've talked about language barrier, could be health barriers, all kinds of reasons that it could be potentially. But all of these issues will impact on a person's ability to be able to access that support. And so where does that leave maybe the disabled person themselves, but also what about their carer? For instance, if there's somebody caring for them. There was research done by Carers UK that about in the last 12 months, 75% of carers had not had a carers assessment done. So a carers assessment is what you can get available from your local authority to help you or to get support to enable you to keep caring if that's what you want to do. But if 75% of carers haven't had a carers assessment in the last 12 months, how do you think they're coping at the minute? Statistically, if I can be blunt, probably not that great. So again, where does that leave them? What does their quality of life look like, for example? So just to kind of summarize, and I think we've hit on a few things there. So it could be, so we've talked about that lack of awareness and lack of public information. Like I said, we are by and large a digital age now. All well and good if you know how to use it or to use the internet, but what about everybody else? This feeling that the system is complicated. I mean, it is complicated to a degree. It's why places like Citizens Advice exist. But it can feel complicated. What if you're someone that has never interacted with the welfare system? Or what if you're someone who hasn't done it for decades, for instance? Or you might have done it in the past, but you didn't have a great experience and you think, oh, I'm not going through that again. I'm not touching that with a barge pole. That pride, that stigma that we talked about. I'm all right. I don't need to claim benefits. I'm all right. It doesn't matter that it takes me, 45 minutes to get up and down the stairs or whatever it might be. But I do think there's something to be said, personally speaking, at least amongst the older generation, about this idea of pride and stigma, not wanting to be seen to be taking something that they maybe feel like they don't need as much as other people. Hmm. Fear of forms, assessments, fairly self-explanatory. I mean, things like applying for PIP, for example, or attendance allowance. Especially when you get things like PIP forms and so on, they're quite, if you've ever seen a PIP form, it's quite chunky, isn't it? It's a bit of a novel. You're going to look at that and think, oh, what are they going to ask me? Do I really have to sit and fill all that in? Oh, do you know what? I'll just not bother. It'll be fine. I'll just not bother. They might just assume that they're not eligible. Like I've had clients in the past where they had kind of long-term health conditions, and I think because it was a long-term health condition, they'd gotten used to it, for want of a better phrase. So like I had a client where they struggled with managing stairs, so bless them, they would literally crawl up the stairs. And when we talked about applying for, I think it was PIP in that case, there was sort of just a few years before pension age, so we're looking at PIP, and they were saying, no, no, I'm fine, I'm absolutely fine. And it's like, okay, but you're having to crawl up the stairs, like that's not okay. It's that kind of thing. So they might just assume that they're not eligible because they've sort of internalized that, well, I've been doing this for so long and I'm all right. And kind of when you take that step back and sort of make people think, are you really though? Could you not be better? People deserve more than just all right. They could be scared of that social services intervention if they think it's going to lead to some kind of intervention. So again, I've had clients in the past, like a husband and wife couple, where the wife was caring for the husband, and husband was getting attendance allowance. She started getting carers allowance, but or an underlying entitlement rather. And her health was deteriorating, and she was terrified of applying for attendance allowance in her own right because she was scared about what it might kind of signal to people. How is it that I can care for husband when I've got health conditions of my own? What's that going to lead to? Now, I should say you're perfectly within your right to claim things like attendance allowance where you are sort of both caring for each other, but I can understand where that fear comes from. I'm not saying it's necessarily true, but I can understand why they would think that. Misconception that or that I used to see a lot was this belief that attendance allowance was means tested. Honestly, I remember when I first started as an advisor being quite surprised by the number of, again, particularly older people who had that idea and just thought, well, I'm not going to be entitled to it because I've got X amount of money in the bank. It's not. It's not means tested. You can have 50p, you can have 50 grand. Doesn't matter. Doesn't make a difference. Might be, as we've said, the idea of pride, that they see finances as a kind of private matter. It's, I don't want to talk about money with you, stranger, Citizens Advice Advisor, DWP assessor, or whoever it might be. I'm not talking to you about my money. You don't need to know. Well, that's a perfectly valid view to take, but without certain types of information, depending on what benefit we're applying for, you might need to give that, and so it does impact on the support that they can receive. Or this idea that, as I said, there are people who are worse off and need it more than me. Well, again, I can see the logic of that, but if you're entitled to it, you're entitled to it. So, yeah. Excuse me. So we're going to move on and we're just going to think about some of the key benefits that are available to support perhaps older people or carers for older people. So first up, perhaps the most obvious one I would say in some respects is going to be carers allowance. So in terms of the criteria, you'll see it on the screen there. Generally, you need to be 16 or over, and I do need to spend at least 35 hours a week caring for someone earning a qualifying disability benefit. Now, if I may, before I go any further, you guys seem to know your stuff. So, who can tell me what is a qualifying disability benefit? For the purposes of carers allowance, what is a qualifying disability benefit? Attendance allowance, PIP, DLA. Thank you, Sue. Yeah, there's slightly more to it than that, but yeah, you're pretty spot on. So your qualifying disability benefits for the purposes of carers allowance, your three main ones are attendance allowance, PIP, and DLA. PIP, personal independence payment, if somebody's working age. DLA for children, if we're looking after a child with a disability or a health condition. Now, one or two slight caveats to that. If we were caring for a child, and they're getting DLA, they need to be getting specifically the middle or the high rate care component of DLA. I'm afraid that the lower rate care component wouldn't qualify you because you're not spending enough time caring for that child in that case. So if it's DLA for children, it needs to be middle or high rate care component, but absolutely. If it's PIP, then they need to be getting the daily living component, standard or enhanced, it doesn't matter, but they need to be getting the daily living component. And for older people who are maybe above state pension age, they need to be getting attendance allowance. It doesn't matter if it's the lower or the higher rate, but they need to be getting attendance allowance in that case. They are your three kind of main disability benefits in respect of carers allowance. Carers allowance is a little bit unique in that it does have what we call this earnings threshold. You are perfectly entitled, perfectly allowed, nothing wrong with it, to work and to claim carer's allowance. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But it is vitally important that you do not earn more than £204 a week after tax, national insurance, and expenses. £204 a week, that is equivalent to 16 hours a week at minimum wage, assuming that you are 21 or over. So you can work, but you cannot work more than that. And that really is vitally important because if somebody breaches that earnings threshold, then they are strictly speaking not entitled to carers allowance. That has been the subject of quite a lot of scrutiny in the last few months, maybe even years by this point, if I'm honest. So if I may just give you some context, because it was actually in the papers again just a couple of days ago, I saw it. When somebody is working and claiming carers allowance, what is meant to happen is the DWP HMRC are meant to get a notification in real time to say, hello, this person has breached the earnings threshold. They've earned more than this £204 a week. You should probably do something about that. In a lot of cases, though, the DWP, HMRC, they're getting that notification, but they weren't really doing anything about it. And so the person working and claiming carers allowance, they kept being paid carers allowance that they weren't actually entitled to anymore. And then months, sometimes years down the line, were being chased, for want of a better word, by the DWP in respect of overpayments that could sometimes run to thousands of pounds. Now, it is something that the government are looking into at this moment in time. There is a review looking into overpayments of carers allowance. Sorry. But at this moment in time, we're waiting to see what kind of final action the government take, whether that's maybe refunding any overpayments that people might have paid back, whether it's just writing the debt off. It was in the papers a couple of days ago because I remember seeing an article that actually the DWP was still enabling people to be able to build up these overpayments despite what they'd said to the contrary. So if you're working and claiming carers allowance, I can't stress enough, it's vitally important you don't earn more than £204 a week. You also need to not be in full-time education and not be subject to immigration control. So all I mean by that is you need to have what we call recourse to public funds. You need to have the right to claim benefits. So maybe you're a British or Irish citizen, you might have settled status under the EU settlement scheme, maybe pre-settled status, you might be a refugee. You need to have some kind of immigration status that means that you have the right to claim benefits. Now, just in the context of kind of all the people and pensioners, just for clarity, where I've mentioned here about your earnings need to be £204 or less a week after tax or national insurance. That does not include any private or occupational pension income that you might be getting. All right. Now, in terms of if you are maybe an older person who is caring for somebody, strictly speaking, you can get your state pension and claim carers allowance in a fashion to a degree. I can work and I can get my state pension. Sorry, I can claim carers allowance and I can get my state pension. Nothing wrong with that. But if the value of my state pension is worth more than the value of carers allowance, then I will not get the money from carers allowance. And if my state pension is somehow less than that, so maybe I had like a particularly poor national insurance record for whatever reason, if it's less than that, I can get the money from carers allowance, but I'd only get the difference between the two. So if my state pension was like £70 a week, I can apply for carers allowance, I'll get it, no problem there, but I would get the difference between £70 and £86.45 a week in my as my carers allowance payment. You can still potentially apply for a carers allowance and have what we call an underlying entitlement to it. I've never liked that phrase because I always think it's a little bit wordy and I feel like it's never very clear for people. Excuse me. An underlying entitlement just means I have applied for carers allowance, but because of that rule around state pension, I am not getting the money. So instead, you'll get something called an underlying entitlement, which is essentially just where you are down on paper as getting it, you're just not getting the money from it. If you are getting that underlying entitlement, even just the underlying entitlement without the money itself, it can lead to increases on other benefits. There are two in particular that we're going to think about. Carer Edition and the Carer Premium. Now, I've never liked these names because the thing is that they're pretty much identical. They mean the same thing. They're worth the same amount of money. The Carer Edition is what that extra amount is called specifically in relation to pension credit. Carer premium is what it's called specifically in relation to other benefits. So it could be housing benefit, might be a premium added to council tax support or ESA or whatever it might be. They are worth the exact same amount of money. It's an extra £48 and 15 pence a week per person, if that is the case. And even if you only get that underlying entitlement, you could still be entitled to that addition. All right. Any questions about anything so far, folks? We're all good. Excuse me. Sorry, losing my voice a little bit. Perks the job. So, if I am not entitled to carer's allowance, So, for example, maybe I'm caring for somebody, but I don't quite spend 35 hours a week caring for that person. Potentially, I can claim something called carers credits instead. So if you imagine carers allowance, what it does is it gives you national insurance contributions, and then it gives you that allowance, if you'll pardon that expression, that £86.45 a week. Carers credits will just give you the national insurance credit, so you won't get any money with carers credits, but it would help protect your national insurance record in relation to things like your state pension, because you need 35 years worth of national insurance credits to get your, well, not credits or contributions to get the full amount of your state pension. So carers credits would go towards those. Now, to be eligible for carers credits, you do need to be caring for somebody for at least 20 hours a week. Again, I don't mean you need to be physically with them for 20 hours a week, but you need to be caring for them in one form or another for at least 20 hours a week. And you can potentially get carers credits instead. So you wouldn't get any money with carers credits, but you would get the sort of the national insurance contributions. The other difference with carers credits is that there isn't a savings threshold in that respect. So that earnings threshold. So that £204 a week earnings threshold that I just talked about earlier only applies to carers allowance. There is no earnings threshold. Your income, your saving, your investments, and so on won't make any difference when it comes to carers credits. All right. So alongside that, we do also have, and I touched on it earlier briefly, this idea of pension credit. So pension credit is a benefit available to support pensioners who might be living on lower incomes, which unfortunately carers very often are. There are two types of pension credit, and I'll come to the rates in just a second. You've got the guarantee credit, and that can top your income up to a minimum amount, and I'll come to the rates in a moment. You've also got something called the savings credit. Now, the savings credit is a much smaller top up. You'll see in a second, it's only about 17 to £20 a week, thereabouts. But the thing with the savings credit is that it's only available if you've reached state pension age before the 6th of April 2016. So I mean, we're already, what, more than 10 years on from that date. So as we get further and further away, less and less people are going to be eligible for the savings credit. So more often than not, we'll have to start thinking more about the guarantee credit. Now, the great thing about pension credit, as I said, is that it can act to like a passport almost to all kinds of additional support. So it could be housing benefit, council tax reduction, your free TV license, social tariff broadband, your warm home discount. You could get help with certain NHS costs. It really is. Pension credit is about so much more than the money itself. Pension credit in particular it is quite significantly underclaimed. I mean, I think we mentioned earlier, only around about 60% of people that are eligible for pension credit are actually getting it. And that's despite, sort of recent pushes by the government. I mean, you might remember, was it coming up about 2 years ago or so now, when the government wanted to means test the winter fuel payment and restrict it to people in receipt of pension credit to sort of counteract, if you like, some of the criticism they got around that. There was this big push to help people enroll for pension credit to thereby protect their entitlement to it. Now, that did, to the credit, it did lead to a fairly significant uptake for a time, but actually the numbers have come back down again since then, so it hasn't really been sustained as such. So only about 60% of people that are eligible for pension credit are getting it and potentially missing out on all kinds of extra support. So if you think about the rates of pension credit, so you've got it on the screen there. So firstly, you've got the guarantee credit. So we said that that was the one that can top you up to a minimum amount. So if my income is assessed as being less than £238 a week, then the guarantee credit can top me up to that. Or if we're applying as a couple, if our joint income is less than £363.25 a week, then the guarantee credit can top us up to that amount. But in some circumstances, it can actually top you up more than that, but we'll come to that in just a second. Separately, you've got the savings credit. Now, as I said, it's a much smaller top up. So £17.30 for a single person, £20.10 if you're a part of a couple. But again, savings credit only applies if you reach state pension age before the 6th of April 2016. So there are additional amounts that can be added to pension credit, which I touched on a bit earlier. So the additional amount for carers that applies to pension credit is, as I said, £48.15 a week. So if I may backtrack ever so slightly, if I was a single person and I was getting the carer addition added to my pension credit, this minimum amount wouldn't be £238, it'd be about 280, £85 thereabouts. So it would top me up to that instead because of that additional amount. So like I have seen clients in the past where like I had a lady a few months ago who her income was assessed as being just over this threshold, and I mean by about £5, hardly anything, but she was over the threshold, so she wasn't entitled to it. She became a carer, started claiming the carer's allowance, and so was now entitled to that carer premium. And so because of that extra amount, it bumped her amount up, meaning that suddenly now, on top of getting carer's allowance, she was suddenly entitled to all of this extra support, both through pension credit and all of the extra help that comes along with that. So it can absolutely be worth checking for. So it's £48.15 for a week. That can be included in your what's called your minimum guarantee, which is just the amount on the screen there. You need to be paid carers allowance or carer support payment in Scotland, but we'll won't really be touching on that. Or you need to claim carers allowance and fulfil the qualifying conditions, but it can't be paid as you get state pension or have another overlapping benefit instead. In that case, so that's that underlying entitlement that I mentioned earlier. You can potentially, both you and your partner, qualify for that carer addition, in which case it's not £48.15 a week, it would be £96.30 that would be added to your pension credit in this case. So you'd be looking around about 460-ish pounds a week is what the guarantee credit would top you up to in that case. Separately, there is an amount, now this is more for the disabled person themselves as opposed to the carer. There is something called the Severe Disability Edition that can be added to pension credit as well. It is worth £86.05 a week. For a single person, potentially you can both get it as part of a couple. I'll come to that in a sec. But to be eligible for it, you need to be getting a disability benefit. So that would be something like attendance allowance, PIP, or maybe middle or high rate DLA if you still haven't moved over. So one of those qualifying disability benefits, similar to what we talked about earlier. Also, you need no one to be paid carers allowance or the carers element to look after you, carers element of universal credit, that is. If they are only getting that underlying entitlement to carers allowance, then they are not paid carers allowance. So it doesn't affect your severe disability addition. So if somebody starts claiming carers allowance for looking after you and you were getting this disability addition, the severe disability addition, if they're getting the money from carers allowance, then you potentially could lose that severe disability addition. If they only have that underlying entitlement, it should not affect your severe disability addition because there's no money involved in that respect. They're not actually being paid carers allowance. You also need to live alone or be what we call treated as living alone. Now, generally speaking, when we say live alone, that's fairly self-explanatory, but there are some exceptions to that. So, for example, maybe I am living with a partner who is also getting a disability benefit and has nobody claiming carers allowance or carers element of UC for looking after them. Well, in that case, yeah, I can still qualify. And in that case, actually, we'll get the couple rate of the severe disability edition. So it'll be £172.10 a week that is included in that case. It might be that somebody in their household is blind, for example, then they can be ignored for the purposes of this. It might be that you have a child or what we call a qualifying young person, so somebody who might still be in some form of education, then they can be ignored. Generally speaking, if you are part of a couple, you're only really going to qualify though on the couple basis if you are both getting that disability benefit yourselves. So, just to kind of give you an example here, we've got Mary and David. So Mary and David are both awarded attendance allowance and claim carers allowance for caring for each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. They both have a state pension worth more than carers allowance, so they have an underlying entitlement only. They are not actually being paid carers allowance. Now, in that case, they qualify for two carers additions. So £96.30 a week because they're both caring for each other. So two carer additions. And because carers allowance is not paid to either of them, they actually also qualify for that couple rate of the severe disability edition. That is £172.10 a week on top of 96.30. So their pension credit has just increased by £268.40 a week. And I'd love to tell you what the yearly figure is for that, but I'm not that good at maths. Any questions about anything we've gone through, folks? Speak now or forever hold your peace. No? So we also have attendance allowance. So attendance allowance, of course, is the disability benefit for people of pension age. Now, right off the bat, I will say it's not as generous as other disability benefits like PIP, because attendance allowance does not include any kind of mobility component. The government basically take the view that as we get older, a certain level of mobility challenges to be expected, and so attendance allowance does not look at your mobility in that respect. You need to have your care needs for at least 6 months. Now, firstly, there's a bit of a misconception with disability benefits more broadly that you need a diagnosis in order to be able to qualify for a disability benefit. And I just want to be clear, you don't. You do not need a diagnosis in order to claim attendance allowance or any other disability benefit. Personally, though, in my experience, I have to say it can help because then it kind of evidences that yes, I have this condition. You know, if my issues are caused by this particular health problem, whatever it might be. It is not a prerequisite. One assumption that I used to come across quite a lot with older people in particular was that they used to assume that they needed a carer. Now, strictly speaking, attendance allowance, yeah, it's about your daily living and your care needs, but you don't need a carer in that respect. Again, it's not a prerequisite in that sense. It's about the care and the supervision needs that you have. It's not about the diagnosis or whether you have X, Y, or Z. Now, with attendance allowance itself, there are two rates to it. You've got a lower rate and a higher rate. So the lower rate, £76.70, higher rate, £114.60. Apologies, that's weekly, that should say. Now, depend in terms of how that's assessed, the lower rate you will get if you need care or supervision frequently through day or through night. One or the other will get you the lower rate. The higher rate, that would be more geared towards people who had care and supervision needs through day and through night, day and night, both together, both at the same time, will get you the higher rate instead. Now, there is nothing wrong, strictly speaking, with you might have health conditions yourself or some kind of challenge yourself, and you might be caring for someone. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. All I would say is just be careful that whatever you write in your, say, your attendance allowance application, you're not then saying that you provide that kind of care. So don't be saying, my husband has to cook all of the meals for me because the arthritis in my hand makes it too painful for me to do it myself. If you're then saying, oh yeah, I go over to my neighbours and I make his tea because actually he struggles with that as well. So there's nothing wrong with claiming a disability benefit while being a carer yourself. But I would just always be mindful that you don't want to kind of contradict yourself, for want of a better phrase. So, just to kind of summarize that, and then we'll be coming towards the Q&A part that I mentioned. How can we support maybe older people or carers when they're wanting to claim benefits? So firstly, I would always recommend, as much as possible, try and do your homework. Now, it's easy for me to say that, but in practice it can be more complicated. But as much as possible, try and do your research. So, what kind of income do they have? And of course, this might not necessarily be the same for every benefit. If it's attendance allowance, it's not means tested, but so your income's not going to matter. But all the same, there's other things to consider. So, do we need to think about, okay, what other benefits are you getting, if anything? How much do you have in savings? Do you own your home? Is it a council property? Is it private rented? Think about the person's health condition and their care needs. So it's all well and good saying that they want to apply for attendance allowance or whatever it might be, but what challenges do they have? Right? How often? How frequently? One thing that can be useful, especially when it comes to things like disability benefit applications, Citizens Advice does actually have template diaries that are available. So we have one for DLA, one for PIP, and one for attendance allowance. I used to use these with clients all the time when it came to kind of filling in the application forms itself, because they're really effective ways of documenting and thinking about, okay, what kind of challenges do I actually have? And I will say, in my experience, it can be a bit of a shock for people in some respects. Because I think it's especially with older people, and like I said earlier, that you've maybe adapted to your way of doing things, and then suddenly when you've got it written down in front of you that it takes you 25 minutes to get up the stairs or whatever it might be, actually can be a bit of a shock. But those are the kind of things that we're going to want to be thinking about when it comes to things like disability benefit applications and so on. Do they have any kind of accessibility needs? Do we need to think about the language that we are using? We want to try and build trust and reassure people. We're there to help people. We're there to support them. We're not there to judge. So we just need to bear that in mind as best as we can. And, if we are looking at things like disability benefits and so on, well, okay, what about the carer? Do I need to look more widely at carer support in that case? Do they need a carer's assessment from the local authority? Do they know what that is? Have they ever heard of that? Do they want one? Do they want to keep being carer? Does the person with the health needs, do they need a care needs assessment from the local authority? Right? What's their quality of life like? What do they want it to look like? Ask open questions to that end as much as possible, because with open questions, we get more detail. You don't really want to be asking kind of yes, no, maybe questions. We would give them space to talk, is what I would say. Give them the space and the freedom to just be able to talk. And if need be, by all means, redirect the conversation if they ramble on a bit too much, but just give them that space. They'll know themselves. They'll know themselves best, their challenges and the help that they might need. Don't assume that they're ineligible. So personally, like when I was helping somebody with, say, a PIP form, for example, I always try to kind of approach it from the view of, right, this person is going to be eligible for PIP because of X, Y, Z, and this is what I need to evidence. I mean, unless they say something completely different where you think, oh no, you're definitely not eligible anymore. But generally, I would try and sort of approach it from the point of view of, you're eligible for PIP because you have these issues, these challenges. So how can I put that across? So we are coming towards the end of the session. Before we move to the Q&A part, just once again, a reminder, there is that code on the screen there. That code you can use for 20% off our Carers and Caring Matters course and Benefits for Older People course, which I will talk about very briefly. That code is valid until the 24th of June, so about a week's time. So they will apply to our Carers course. So our Carers course, it's a half-day course, CPD accredited. And in terms of what it will explore, it's everything to do with kind of benefits associated with caring. So a bit of what we've talked about today, but much more besides. Carers, care needs assessment, what kind of other financial support is available, as well as things like home adaptations and disabled facilities grants. And then similarly, we've got our benefits for older people course. It's also a full day course, CPD accredited, covers just about every benefit you can think of in relation to supporting people in older age. It also looks at how can we support people to claim those benefits. So it talks about the rates that are available, the extra support they might be entitled to if and when they do get those benefits, and thinking about how changes in circumstances could impact on their entitlement as well. So just to finish off very quickly, our next session we'll be looking at universal credit when things go wrong, sanctions, deductions, and hardship periods. That is the 16th of July at 2 o'clock. And you will be able to sign up to that if you're interested. There'll be a link in the email that you're going to get very soon. So I'm going to stop the recording here, if I may. And does anybody have any questions about anything at all that we have gone through?